the secular position is that the infanticide bit is wrong, but the abortion bit is okay. And I find this hard logically because actually they really exist on a continuum, and cultures that permit infanticide permit it for exactly the same reasons that our culture permits abortion.
In the coming week in the UK, MPs will have a free vote on two crucial issues, both involving the sanctity of life. Firstly, there is legislation that will decriminalise abortion up to term for any reason whatsoever. And here's what this MP thinks.
Any woman could end a pregnancy at any time, 35 weeks, 36 weeks, 37 weeks, without committing an offence. And are you comfortable with that?
Yes, I am.
Some people would say, though, 37, late on in pregnancy, it's a baby.
Secondly, there is a vote of conscience on the terminally ill adults end of life bill. This politician makes a compelling case against.
In the US state of Oregon, over 47% of people who ended their lives cited as a reason the fact that they didn't want to be a burden on their families or caregivers. And I fear those changes will be inevitable if the bill in Westminster passes, because courts in those places have felt obliged to extend the rights given to some citizens to others. It becomes a macabre certainty. There will be no turning back from it.
But how should we think about these issues at the beginning and end of life? Louise Perry, the feminist and author, says these are signs that we are repaganizing. It is Christianity that has given us our unique view of human dignity, and to lose Christianity is to lose protections for the human person, both at the beginning and the end of life. But here is Louise Perry on why abortion and infanticide is really on the same spectrum, why the sanctity of life is a profoundly Christian thing, and why losing it means that we are repaganizing.
I think that we make a very grave error in rejecting Christianity on the basis that it is not kind of radically egalitarian in the way that modern feminism might like, or some branches of it might like, without thinking seriously about what the alternatives are. I mean, the alternative that's proffered is, I believe this is known as the nirvana fallacy, the idea that setting up a perfect alternative and saying, well, why not choose this one? why not just choose a entirely egalitarian society with absolutely no downsides for anyone ever, or anyone's ever sad. Yeah. And so that does sound nice, but the problem is that, of course, this is a theorized future which can't be realized.
Right. Utopia literally means no place. There is no place that is utopia. So yeah, let's stop thinking about utopian answers. Yeah.
Whereas what we're really dealing with, if we're realistic, is something like paganism. I mean, that's what I argued in this essay I wrote some years ago for First Things. We are repaganizing. That I think it's more likely. I think that if you throw off Christianity and you don't adopt, say, Islam or some other serious ideological, intellectual, spiritual rival to Christianity, I don't think that as the New Atheist hoped, as I hoped as a New Atheist, that you will basically have Christian morality, but with everyone being much more sensible and rational. I think it's evident looking around us that's not what's happening. I think that what you are more likely to revert to is maybe something like paganism, in the sense of a more a rejection of the metaphysical God and a belief in more immanent kinds of, and a more immanent style of religion in which some things are still held to be sacred, and there are still rituals, and there are still, it's like there are many of the same qualities that we're already aware of, but you don't have that belief in the transcendent being who is omniscient, etc. I think that we already see this to some extent. I mean, the embrace of assisted suicide across much of the de-Christianized West, I think is possibly evidence of this. And it's not that. Do you remember this ad that was brought out in Canada on the it was an ad. I mean, of all things, it was an ad for some department store. I can't remember the name of it because some Canadian brand I'm not familiar with.
Dying in a hospital is not what's natural. That's not what's soft. In these kind of moments, you need softness.
This department store took out an ad for its various goods and services, using this, also promoting assisted suicide, and it cast a woman who would go on to die by assisted suicide on the day, or I think the day after. I think she died the day before the ad was released, and when it was released, she was already dead. And this was quite a young woman. She was like in her 40s. And she had Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which causes joint pain. But she had said to friends that if she'd had more support from the Canadian government in terms of support services, she might have been able to. She wouldn't have wanted to die, but she felt like she didn't have that support, so she did die. But the thing that I found so telling about this ad and the sort of phenomenon that it represented is that that this new pagan-esque religion considers choice to be sacred, and personal autonomy to be sacred. It considers things to be sacred. It doesn't believe in a deity, but it does consider things to be sacred. It just considers different things to be sacred. It is religion-like, but maybe in a more pagan style. And maybe that's not surprising that we might revert to sort of the other great competitor within Europe, to Christianity.
Yes. Yeah. And it goes to show that there is no neutrality, really. We probably are these ineradicably religious beings. We've had a go at post-Christianity. We've had a go at just being secular in a neutral sense. But as Tom Holland points out, the saeculum was a Christian idea that, yes, there's the city of man, and we are to, within this horizon of the next 100 years, kind of pursue life in the here and the now, but that is always to be tied to the city of God. And the tie between you and the city of God is the religio. This is the religious. And that people have always been religious. And the Western conceit is that we are the one and only civilization that hasn't had its gods, that hasn't had its sacred values. And one thing that de-Christianization has done, I guess, is taught us all that we are religious creatures, and if we won't have the Christian God, we will have some other kinds of gods. Tell us more about that repaganizing article, because it was very popular for First Things, and it was very sobering for people to read. What were some of the data points that you were using to wake us up to the repaganizing idea? What has been some of the responses that people have made to that article? Because I think it has been shared very, very widely.
I think it was the most read thing on First Things that year. I've written 2 things for First Things, and I always, because I really like it, and I like the editor, and I've written 2 things, both of which were like the biggest thoughts that I'd had this decade, the 2 biggest thoughts that I'd had, and the second one, which was on modernity and birth rates, I think was also, if not the best read, then the second best read that year. So anyway, the repaganizing article, it was mostly about abortion, really, in the sense that the Roman world famously had a very relaxed attitude towards abortion and infanticide, and the secular position is that the infanticide bit is wrong, but the abortion bit is okay. And I find this hard logically, because actually they really exist on a continuum, and cultures that permit infanticide permit it for exactly the same reasons that our culture permits abortion. And so I think even if it's uncomfortable, I think they do really need to be understood as the same phenomenon. and discussed in the same moral terms. And the reason I think, I don't know if you agree with me on this, we'll find out. The reason I think that Christians take such a strong view against both infanticide and abortion, and a very radical view for the time, is that Christianity involves at its core the protection of the weak against the strong, and the love of the humble and the suffering. And Roman paganism didn't think that. I really didn't think that. And that's the great inversion that Christianity proposes in the first century, right? That actually it is the slave and the leper and these are and the child, and these are the people who actually deserve our greatest love and protection, not our rather than being despised. And I think it's hard to hold to that idea without eventually reaching the conclusion that unborn babies, or indeed newly born babies, ought to be protected in the same way. And this is a problem for feminism. It's a problem for feminism because it is of course the case that pregnancy places much greater burdens on women than on men. Of course it is. And if you have a moral injunction against abortion, that is going to cause greater suffering to women than it is to men. And I say this as someone who has absolutely appalling pregnancies, right? Like, female suffering is baked into this. It absolutely is. Equally, if you abandon the idea that the weak ought to be given special moral protection, you do end up also abandoning the idea that women ought to be given special moral protection, because women are weaker than men. Women are physically weaker than men, and also women are made physically more vulnerable by childbearing. And so if you want to make a moral claim against, the Nietzschean, let's say, that women, by virtue of their physical inferiority, are also morally inferior to men, and ought to be, that it is permissible, for instance, to rape a slave woman because you can. If you want to still hold to that moral idea and then draw a very firm line and say that we shouldn't apply exactly that same line of thought to unborn children or newly born children. I mean, the thing is, the infanticide thing is not all that theoretical, because there are contemporary philosophers, Peter Singer famously, who think that infanticide is permissible.
Because I don't think that humans are special just in virtue of being a member of the species Homo sapien, I think that if you have humans who are, for example, severely damaged at birth, that it's not wrong to end their lives. So I think that in some cases, human beings don't have a right to life because they don't have the possibility of having a worthwhile and meaningful life. And so, of course, I get flack from the conservative moralists and conservative Christians from that perspective.
And there is talk within, say, the Canadian government, I write about this in the First Things piece, about permitting infanticide under the assisted suicide laws. It's not fanciful, actually, to see this as being a very real moral possibility. And I don't really know how you draw that line. I think that you can, and I say this sometimes, I don't actually want to. I feel very queasy on the abortion question when it comes to legislation. I think that abortion is a bad thing, but I also don't think that just banning it, I can see how much suffering that would cause, just banning it. So I'm an agnostic on that question, or I'm an agnostic specifically on the question of what you do about the moral harm of abortion, not whether it is a bad thing, a bad, sad thing, which, by the way, is what most people think. The idea that everyone is really polarized on this question is not really true. The people who think that having an abortion is like getting a tooth pulled are very rare.
Yeah. And that women tend to be more in favor of restrictions on time limits for abortion than men are. Interestingly, if we're going to think about male and female issues, and for all your agnosticism, though, Louise, I think you've been very brave in shining a light on this issue. I mean, the poem with which your book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, begins is an absolute gut punch that does shine a spotlight, at least on this issue of infanticide. You quote from Scottish poet Holly McNish, and it's the poem is called Conversation with an Archaeologist. It goes like this. He said they'd found a brothel on the dig he did last night. I asked him how they know. He sighed. A pit of baby's bones. A pit of newborn baby's bones was how to spot a brothel. And in those 6 lines of poetry, you kind of compress so many issues to do with sexual politics there, and so many issues to do with the plight of women. And what do we do when we just unleash eros? And have in many cases in Rome there were state-sponsored brothels and that kind of thing. Well, sex is related to children, and children are the ones who suffer when we just let eros kind of have its way, as it were. And I think that was the real take-home message I got, both from The Case Against the Sexual Revolution and then this newer version of that book, that actually, when we let eros simply run through a society, we might actually be privileging the very people that we don't want to privilege, i.e. Alpha males, those who are already the powerful. Is that sort of core to your message?
Yeah, I think that the real winners from the sexual revolution have been a minority of men.
To find out why the real winners from the sexual revolution have been a minority of men, you'll have to find the full interview on our channel. It's coming out soon. I talked to Louise Perry about the case against the sexual revolution, about the case for having children, about how we are repaganizing, why she's going to church, and why it would be a good thing if we found Christian faith again. The full interview is coming out soon, but have you signed up to the Rebirth conference? Justin Briley and I are putting on this conference in the centre of London on the 22nd of November. We're going to look at the surprising rebirth of belief in God, why it's happening, and how the church can respond to it. Go to rebirthconference.net, get your ticket now, and while you're here, why don't you hit like on the video, share it around the place, and subscribe so that you won't miss the full Louise Perry interview.